this video we'll be looking at tropism. Now tropism is actually a part of the separate biology course, so if you're doing GCSE Biology as a separate science, then you will need to know this content. And this is actually a topic based in the chapter about hormonal system. So we're going to be looking at, instead of the human hormonal system, we're going to look at how plant hormones actually influence how the plant respond to their environment, and also looking at how we can use some of these plant hormones in a commercial setting. So first of all, let's look at tropism. So the word tropism refers to how plants respond to the environment, and especially in terms of how the environment might change. And this is due to an uneven distribution of auxins. So auxins is actually a very specific type of plant hormones, and we actually refer to this a lot in terms of plant responses or tropism, but we can also look at how it can be used commercially. Now, a few things to remember about auxins is that there are two particular interesting properties that they have. First of all, auxins are hormones, they're chemicals, so they would obey gravity. So if you got originally, say, a plant and the plant fell over, then the auxins would kind of like settle down on the bottom part of the plant instead of moving upwards. The other interesting thing is that auxins really don't like the light. So if you shine light onto a plant, the auxins will actually move to the shaded side, and it doesn't like to be exposed to light. So this is interesting because this will link to the two types of tropism that we'll look at today. So we've got two types here. We've got phototropism and geotropism. So let's start with phototropism. Now, sometimes with these sort of things, we can look at the prefixes of the word to see if we can figure out what it means, right? So photo actually means light. So in the same sense of when we say photosynthesis, it means photo using light to synthesize or to make food, which is what we see in plants and producers. So phototropism is a plant response towards a change in light. So let's say we can look at how phototropism works in the plant shoot, which is the stem part. So let's say this is part of the shoot here, and normally speaking, the auxins are actually produced near the tip of the shoot where the meristem would be. So what happens is that they will kind of have an even distribution across the whole plant. So if I use these dots to represent that, what you will see is that across the whole shoot, there will be auxins kind of found on all parts of the plant. So in this case, this is what happens when it's under uniform light. So where there's light all around it, the auxins will be distributed evenly, and that would promote growth of the shoot equally on both sides because of the even distribution of the auxins. Now, in the case where there is light shining towards the shoot in one particular direction, so let's say if the light is coming in from the right-hand side, so let's say if I use the yellow arrows to represent the light coming from the right, this is what we call a unilateral light. So it's coming from one side. That's what uni means, okay? So unilateral light's coming from the right-hand side, and what happens is that, remember we said that auxins really don't like the light. So that means the auxins will then all move towards the left side here, which is the shaded side, and there won't be any, or at least there's going to be very little auxins on the right hand side instead. So therefore, the growth on the shaded side is going to be a lot faster than the growth on the brighter side. So there might be some auxins there, but there's not going to be a lot compared to the shaded side. So this time I've got an uneven distribution of auxins, leading to an uneven rate of growth in the shoot. So what happens in this particular situation is that over time the left hand side is going to grow a lot faster, therefore causing the shoot to bend towards the light instead because of the extra auxins on the shaded side. So this is phototropism, and we can see this in a lot of different, and pretty much in all plants. So if you are growing some seedlings and you put them next to the window where there's more light coming from the window, obviously, then you can see the shoots will grow towards the window, towards where the light source is. Sunflowers is another really good example where, the flower itself, the stem itself could change so that to make sure that all the flowers and the leaves are facing the light as much as they possibly can to maximize photosynthesis happening. So phototropism is a really beneficial thing for the plant because it can maximize the amount of light it receives, therefore maximizing photosynthesis. So in this situation, we can call this a positive phototropism because it's actively trying to face the stimulus, face the light. So that's why it's positive phototropism. Now, actually, if we see in roots, it will do the opposite, which is negative phototropism. The roots would actively try to move away from the light. And actually, that makes sense because roots want to be underneath the ground in the soil where there is no light, because that's where the water and mineral ions are. So shoots would show positive phototropism, roots would show negative phototropism. So on the other hand, we've got another example which is called geotropism. Now sometimes geotropism can also be referred to as gravitropism because gravi or geo refers to gravity. So it's about how the plant responds towards gravity. So what we mean by that is usually a situation when the plant is somehow placed sideways. So maybe the wind blew it over and then it just toppled over, whatever might be the reason. Right, so let's say this is a plant, a potted plant, and we got the roots on the left hand side here, and you can see that there's the shoot and the flower on the right hand side, if you can see how it's toppled over. So remember we said earlier that auxins don't like the light, but still they obey gravity. Now normally speaking, what happens is there is an even distribution. That's what we expect to see. However, because it's toppled over and it obeys gravity, more of the auxins are going to move to the bottom part of the shoot and the bottom part of the root, because that's how gravity works. They're going to sink to the bottom. Now this is the interesting thing. As we mentioned in phototropism, so an increase in auxin concentration is going to increase the shoot growth. So you can see here that it's going, because there's more auxins on the bottom, it's going to grow faster, and whereas the top bit that has less auxins is going to grow slower. However, it's actually the opposite when it comes to the roots. Roots don't really like having high levels of auxins. If it's just a small amount of it, it will then encourage the roots to grow. However, if there's too much of it, it actually inhibits the root growth. So therefore, the bottom part of the root, which has more auxins, is actually going to grow less. Whereas the top part that has less auxins, that instead would encourage the root to grow. So therefore, we will end up in a situation that looks a bit like this. The shoot's actually going to grow upwards, as we mentioned earlier, because of the increase in auxin concentration actually encourages the shoots to grow. So therefore, the bottom side is going to grow faster, leading to a bend in this particular angle going upwards. Whereas the roots, because the bottom part is inhibited, the top part is going to grow faster, therefore it's actually going to grow downwards like that instead because of that inhibition there. So the top part's growing faster, causing a bend compared to the bottom side, and the shoot's going to grow upwards because of that increased shoot growth on the bottom. So this again is beneficial because we can see that the shoots where the leaves and the flowers are is going to grow, or it's encouraged to grow upwards to receive more light for photosynthesis, and whereas in the roots, they're going to encourage to grow downwards where the water and the minerals would be. So they're trying to reach to where the source of that water or the source of the plant. So therefore, in the shoots here, we can see the shoots are trying to grow away from gravity, away from the ground. So therefore, we call this a negative geotropism being shown in the shoots because it's trying to grow away from gravity against the direction of gravity, whereas the roots is going towards the ground, towards gravity. So therefore, the roots are showing positive geotropism. So they are the exact opposite. So the interesting thing here to remember is that the auxins promote shoot growth, right? Auxins promote or would increase shoot growth in high levels, right? However, in the roots, too high of a concentration would actually reduce the root growth. So they are the opposite. So this is where people tend to get confused about this one. It's not about the just existence of auxins, but it's about the concentration of auxins that could affect the shoot growth and the root growth. So this is a summary of tropism, which is about plant responses towards light and gravity. We're now going to look at some commercial uses of plant hormones. So the interesting thing about this is that because we have now studied some of these plant hormones and realized what plant hormones there are in the plant, we can use them to encourage plants to grow, or sometimes to even slow down the growth to make sure that the fruits doesn't go out of date that quickly. So let's look at a few of these plant hormones now, starting with auxins. So first of all, auxins can actually function as a biological weed killer. So as we mentioned earlier, high concentration of auxins will actually inhibit the roots to grow. So therefore, if I apply enough specially designed auxins that only target weed plants, then I spray them onto the ground, they will then bind to the roots of these weed plants and basically inhibit the roots to grow, which therefore limits their water and mineral uptake, therefore killing the plant. So they are really useful as weed killers, and they're, like I said, they're specially designed so that they won't affect the plants that you actually want to grow. On the other hand, we can actually use auxins as rooting powder. Now, yes, high levels of auxins will inhibit the roots to grow. However, for a seedling or for a very young plant, applying appropriate amounts of auxins can actually encourage the roots to grow. So lower levels of auxins are needed to encourage them to grow. So together with the rooting powder, we can also use auxins to encourage shoot growth or general plant growth in tissue culture. So tissue culture is the specific technique for plant cloning. So in a lab, it could be genetically engineered plants, or you're trying to just clone more plants. You can therefore apply auxins to promote the general growth of that young seedling or the young plant. So that's how we can use auxins in a commercial setting. Now for the other two, they are not as commonly heard of. However, they are also found in plant hormones, and we realized that if we can apply them externally to the plants, it can actually do various different things. Now, ethene only has one key function. Ethene actually controls fruit ripening. So basically, when you have already harvested fruit like apples and bananas, and when the supermarkets are storing them, what happens is that the plants or the fruits will be giving out ethene that actually encourages the fruits to ripen. So you really don't want that to happen, because you want to make sure you have enough stock to sell them for profit. So what they can do is to store them in a way that it reduces ethene release. So either by wrapping them up, or perhaps putting them in a very specifically a controlled environment or storage that gives out other types of gases, and so that slows down the fruit ripening. And when you do want to sell them, then you release more ethene onto the fruits, and that increases the fruit ripening, encouraging customers to actually buy them. So think of a time when maybe if you've had a banana before and you're bringing a banana with you, and you put the banana in your bag, and maybe it looked just like, a normal banana, like just yellow with the yellow skin. But by the time you want to eat them at break time in school, for example, you can see that the black dots already forming on the skin of the banana. And that is a sign of ripening, because the tip of the banana actually releases ethene. So putting it in a bag, which means you're trapping the ethene inside your bag, actually encourage the bananas to ripen. So therefore, that's an example of how we can actively see ethene controlling fruit ripening. And finally, we got to this bit, which is gibberellins. Okay, so gibberellins have 3 commercial uses. So first of all, increasing concentration of gibberellins will promote seed germination. So if they are struggling to germinate because it's cold, or the conditions are just not quite right, you can add gibberellins to help young seeds, for the seeds to actually start growing shoots out of it. You can also increase gibberellins to encourage flowering, so that the plant can produce actual flowers. And they also can be used to increase the size of fruits. So the more gibberellins a plant receives, the bigger the fruits they can grow. So as you can see, that we can definitely use it in agriculture if we're trying to make bigger and nicer fruits for profit. So these are the 3 plant hormones and how they can be commercially used. So there you have it. That's how plant hormones can influence how the plant responds to the environment by tropism, and also how we can use them commercially to control different aspects of agriculture to increase profit. As I said earlier, this is the content for separate biology, meaning when you're doing paper 2, this is probably one of those contents that are likely to come up. Also be aware that there is also a required practical around tropism, specifically usually about phototropism. So make sure that you study up on that particular required practical and see what kind of questions may come up about that one.